What if the real reason things still feel stuck isn't because something is wrong or broken, but because there's still a version of self being carried that quietly believes it hasn't happened yet? Not because it's impossible, not because it's too far away, and not because there's still something left to fix or do, but simply because there's a subtle idea still living in the background that says, I'm not there yet. And that idea, even if small or quiet, is powerful enough to shape what reality keeps showing. The truth is, reality isn't responding to words or wishes, it's responding to identity. It's not about how badly something is wanted, it's about how real it's allowed to be. And that changes everything. Because the moment something is accepted as already true, without resistance, hesitation, or doubt, it begins to take form. And not because it's being forced, but because there's no longer a contradiction between what's being claimed internally and what's being looked for externally. This is where most get stuck, not because they're doing something wrong, but because they're waiting to become the version of self who has the desire, instead of realizing they already are. There's no gap between the desire and the identity unless one keeps creating it with thought. And as long as there's a belief that something still needs to shift in order to be worthy, ready, or aligned, the experience of separation remains. But once it's truly seen that nothing is missing, and that the version of self who already has it exists right now, the entire game changes. Because there's nothing left to chase. There's nothing left to wait for. There's only something to be. So instead of asking, how do I become that version? It becomes more honest to ask, why am I still choosing not to be it? That one question can dissolve years of seeking. And not because it gives the answer, but because it pulls awareness out of the illusion that something needs to happen first. It reminds the mind that the identity doesn't need to shift slowly or eventually, it can shift instantly. It can shift now. And the second that shift happens, everything else begins to respond. The people, the places, the timing, the money, the love, the peace, all of it flows to the version of self who already lives in that outcome. But that version isn't someone far away or better. That version is already here, under the old ideas of waiting and not enough. And once it's allowed to take the lead, things start to feel lighter, easier, more natural, not because life got easier, but because it's no longer being lived from the belief that it's hard. The shift doesn't come after the manifestation. The shift is the manifestation. And once that clicks, everything else does too. Neville once said that when he imagined himself in Barbados, he remained in Barbados. And that one line, simple as it may seem, holds the secret that most people overlook. Because he didn't say he hoped to be in Barbados. He didn't act like he was on his way there. He didn't wait for a ticket to show up before he felt the joy of being there. He simply assumed he was already there, and in his imagination, it was done. That version of him, the one who was already in Barbados, was the only version that existed in his mind. He didn't carry two versions. He didn't waver between what if it doesn't happen, and maybe I'll get lucky. He was there. And because of that full acceptance, reality had no choice but to reflect it back. That's the key right there. There's no room for partial belief. There's no space for being halfway in and halfway out. Most people spend so much time trying to become the version of themselves that has what they want, but they never fully allow themselves to become it. And so they stay in a loop. They visualize it, they script it, they hope for it, but they're still identifying as someone who doesn't yet have it. And that identity is louder than any technique. That identity is what reality listens to. So even if it's imagined every day, even if it's affirmed 100 times, if the self underneath is still the one who's trying to make it happen, it can't land. Because the assumption isn't settled yet. The decision hasn't been made. Neville didn't make a habit of checking the 3D to see if things were working. He didn't go back and forth between doubt and desire. He remained in the state he chose. And because he stayed there, reality shifted around him. That's what most people don't realize. There's no need to wait for the world to confirm what's already been declared. Reality is never the leader. Consciousness is. The outer world only starts to change once the inner self has already made the decision and stuck with it, even when nothing seems to be happening. And that's the difference between trying to shift and remaining in the new self. One is full of effort, the other is full of being. And that's what Neville showed with his Barbados story. He wasn't imagining it as a nice escape or hoping it would come true. He was already enjoying the breeze, already walking those streets in his mind, already hearing the sounds of home. And because of that, his entire world conformed to what he had already accepted as real. That's not magic, that's law. The moment a new version of self is accepted and no longer questioned, that version becomes the only truth. And from there, things move not because they're forced, but because they're finally free to unfold. The real reason something hasn't shown up yet isn't because it's far away, or because it's too big, or because the universe is testing anything. It's simply because the inner state hasn't fully let go of the idea that it's still missing. And that shows up in one very subtle but powerful habit: checking. Constantly looking to the 3D world to see if there's progress, looking for a sign, waiting for something to move, checking emotion, checking time, checking circumstances. And with every little glance, what's really being said underneath is, it's not here yet. That's the energy most people don't realize they're living in. It's not the words being spoken or even the intentions being set. It's the quiet identity that's still trying to see if it's working. And that energy alone keeps the manifestation at arm's length. Think about it this way. No one checks to see if the ground is still beneath their feet every few minutes. No one needs to go look out the window to confirm the sky is still there. Why? Because it's already known. It's already accepted. There's no questioning it. That kind of calm certainty is what causes movement. Not anxiety disguised as faith. Not doubt pretending to be positive thinking. But deep, unshakable knowing. And that knowing isn't something that comes from seeing results. It's what brings the results in the first place. Most people try to reverse that process. They say they'll believe it once they see it. But belief is the seed, not the fruit. The habit of checking isn't just about impatience. It's about identity. If the version of self being lived from still feels the need to look for evidence, that means it doesn't truly feel like it's done. There's still some part that's waiting. And as long as there's waiting, there's no having. Because waiting and having can't exist in the same space. The more energy is placed into watching the outer world, the more it delays the shift, because attention is still rooted in the idea that something needs to change first. But nothing changes first. The change happens within, and then the rest of the world plays catch up. The shift is this, moving from hoping to knowing, from wanting to being, from checking to trusting. That doesn't mean ignoring emotions or pretending things don't feel challenging. It just means choosing not to feed the version of self that still believes it's not here yet. That's the discipline. That's the choice. And it's not always loud or dramatic. It's quiet, steady, and clear. Once there's a decision to stop entertaining the version of reality that says it's not happening, reality starts to respond with new reflections. Not because it's being manipulated, but because it's finally being allowed. Nothing shows up because it's been chased. It shows up because it's been chosen. And that choice becomes real the moment the checking stops and the being begins. There's something powerful that happens the moment the old self stops being entertained. The version that doubts, that waits, that analyzes everything, that looks to the outside world to feel secure. That version was built on fear, on effort, on the idea that life has to be earned, that good things have to be chased, and that love or peace or success is always just one step away. And even though it may feel familiar or safe, it's exhausting. But here's the truth, it's not necessary anymore. Because the moment it's seen clearly for what it is, a set of thoughts, reactions, and assumptions that no longer serve, it can be dropped, not fought, not fixed, not healed into perfection, just released, just allowed to pass, like a cloud that no longer holds weight. And once that happens, something else begins to emerge. Not a new self that needs to be built from scratch, but the real self that was always underneath. The self that doesn't chase, the self that doesn't wait, the self that knows. This isn't about faking confidence or forcing positivity. It's about remembering that the version of self who already has the desire isn't somewhere far away. It's here, now, and the only reason it hasn't been lived fully yet is because attention was still tied to an old script, one that kept saying, not yet. But that script can stop today, because nothing new has to be done to become this version. Only the decision has to be made to stop being the old one. That choice, that decision, is everything. Not because it's dramatic or complicated, but because it's quiet and final. It's a shift in identity, not just in thought. And once that shift happens, once it's no longer a performance or a waiting game, but a real inner decision, reality starts to organize around it. But here's where it gets real, even when things look the same outside, even when circumstances haven't caught up yet, even when no one else sees the difference. That new identity still has to be chosen. That's the part most people miss. They choose it when it feels good, then abandon it when things look slow. But the true shift is about consistency, staying the course. Not because the outer world says yes, but because the inner world already has. And that inner yes is what changes everything. It's what allows the new version of self to stabilize. Because it's no longer about moments of belief, it's about living in the belief. Day by day, breath by breath, walking, thinking, speaking, and reacting as the one who already is. Not trying to maintain it through force, but letting it become the new normal. Letting it be the only truth. And the moment that version becomes the only identity being lived from, life reflects it not slowly, not eventually, but inevitably. Because that's what always happens when who you are becomes non-negotiable. The entire point of this journey is not to keep trying harder or proving something to the world or even to the self. It's about resting. Not the kind of rest that comes from exhaustion, but the kind that comes from deep knowing. Knowing that the desire isn't somewhere far away. Knowing that it's already done. Knowing that the only thing that needed to change was the identity being lived from. And once that identity has shifted, there's nothing left to chase. There's no more waiting. There's only alignment. And alignment doesn't feel like effort. It feels like peace. It feels like relief. It feels like breathing again after holding it in for too long. So many people spend their days trying to act like the version of themselves that has what they want. They visualize, they affirm, they repeat. But underneath it all, they're still questioning. They're still hoping that someday soon they'll wake up and feel different. But the truth is, it's not about acting. It's not about pretending. It's not about performance. It's about deciding. A real, quiet, powerful decision that says, this is who I am now. And once that decision is made, it doesn't get redecided tomorrow. It's not up for debate anymore. It becomes the new baseline. The moment something is fully accepted as true, the nervous system relaxes. The inner world stops fighting itself. That tension, that inner push and pull that used to feel like hard work, it softens. Not because the outside world has changed, but because the inner self has. And that shift is what creates the movement. The outer world always shows up last. It's the mirror, not the engine. And once that's understood, there's no need to keep watching it, checking it, waiting for it. Because the real change already happened. The 3D is just catching up. Resting in that knowing doesn't mean giving up. It doesn't mean doing nothing. It means doing from a different place. It means living as if it's already done, even when it hasn't shown up yet. It means walking through the day with the calm confidence of someone who isn't waiting anymore. Someone who has already received it in consciousness. Someone who doesn't need a sign to feel certain. Because the sign was the desire itself. The moment the desire was born, the solution was already there. And the only work left is to stay there. Not mentally, not temporarily, but fully and emotionally. To be the version of self that doesn't check because there's nothing left to check. When the identity stops asking where is it, and starts living like it's mine, things begin to move in ways that don't always make sense. They come suddenly, naturally, quietly, or sometimes all at once. But they come, because life can't help but respond to the one who finally stopped waiting and started being. That's when it happens, not later. Now, so if it still feels far away, maybe it's not the desire that's delayed. Maybe it's just the old self that hasn't been fully dropped yet. The moment that version is no longer in charge, everything starts to shift. Because you're not waiting to become it. You already are. And once that becomes your truth, the world has no choice but to agree. If this spoke to something deep inside, drop a comment below and say, I'm done waiting, I already am. Let's make that identity real today.